tonight, a commercial airline pilot captain who's going to talk about the gyro system. I'm a career commercial pilot, and I'm currently serving as a senior captain on the B777 fleet of a flag carrier airline. I came across your flat earth clues and thought I'd share something with you. Before I do, I need to explain some technical details. I'll try to keep it short. Please bear with me. So, the ADIRU system, also known as the Air Data Initial Reference Unit, we pronounce it IDARU, is the standard in modern avionics. It's at the center of a modern aircraft's avionics system. This has been the case for some 20-odd years and has replaced the old inertia navigation system, otherwise known as the INS, which was a standalone reference for the navigation computer. IDARU offers 1. Ring laser gyros, no more mechanical spinning discs on gimbals. The RLG, ring laser gyros, are on a tethered or strapped-down platform. 2. The integration with other systems. IDARU provides a reference for other systems like the ADIs, weather radar, yaw damper, thrust control, etc. It used to be the case that all of these systems were independently referenced with dedicated gyros. And 3. Much greater processing power. Whenever IDARU is started up, it needs to be initialized or aligned. This is where the system calibrates itself to the spin of the Earth to prevent drift. The procedure involves entering your latitude and longitude coordinates and commanding the initialization. During initialization, no systems that reference it can be on, and the aircraft must be stationary and stable. Even loading luggage or catering supplies can disrupt it and cause an error. This takes from between 5 to 17 minutes, depending on how far from the equator you are. In October of 2015, I was commanding a routine 6-hour flight. When it came to initializing the IDARU, it returned an error. This is not all that uncommon, and it usually takes on a second attempt. After a few tries, we just got the same thing. Error. I called the tower, explained the situation, and they sent an avionics tech out. He ran his check in the avionics bay and said that it all checked out and that the fault was only with the initialization module inside the box. In this situation, they would normally just unplug it and slide a replacement box in there. However, it's a rare occurrence and has never happened to me. Unfortunately, there was no replacement available at this location. I called the company and reported the situation. After about 20 minutes, someone got back to me and advised that they could get a replacement box to me, but would take about 12 hours. Or, since my flight plan was not outside of ground radar coverage, I could use GPS as a primary reference and adjust the IDARU's data via ATC manually and periodically to compensate for drift. I decided that the later suggestion was within safe limits and made the decision to continue. As instructed, I had my first officer regularly call ATC for ground radar positioning and make necessary adjustments to the IDARU data. However, throughout the entire flight, and this was a 6-hour flight, no drift occurred. This was a real head-scratcher, and since it's company policy and my personal policy to understand as much as possible about the aircraft and its systems, I wanted to know why. I talked to someone at our fleet maintenance department and was told that they didn't make repairs to any black boxes, and I should talk to the manufacturer. In this case, Honeywell. I contacted Honeywell and managed to talk to a senior IDARU engineer. He was very helpful. It turns out they don't make the ACM, the Alignment Calibration Module, which looks a bit like a desktop PC hard drive, painted bright orange with warnings printed on it, "Do not open, serviceable only by manufacturer." It turns out that there's only one company that supplies these modules to all avionics makers, and nobody else seems to know anything about their workings. I tried contacting the company and was just given the runaround. This is very strange since pilots are usually welcome anywhere in the industry. I could show up unannounced at Boeing and get treated like family. After a lot of digging, I found out that this mysterious ACM manufacturer is a contractor to NASA, and that's all I can find out. To date, I've been unable to talk to anyone there and still can't find out anything about this ACM. It feels like I've hit a wall, but I'm still digging. To be fair, I wouldn't describe myself as a flat earther. I'm just someone who wants this question answered. If there are any breakthroughs on this, I'll let you know. Feel free to use any of this on your show. Okay, so let me break that down for you real quick. Inside the gyro system that he was talking about, the gyro system, in this case, the black box, was made by Honeywell. The Alignment Calibration Module is not made by Honeywell. It's subcontracted out by another company, and that company has it sealed to where only they are allowed to work on it, but they don't ever work on it. They just swap them out. They just swap out the parts. So what happened was this particular alignment module broke before he could fly. The weird, on the weird circumstance, they couldn't get a new one in there, so he flew the 6 hours without using it. And the plane should have drifted because of the curvature and the Coriolis effect, otherwise known as the spinning of the Earth. And it didn't. The plane didn't drift for 6 hours on a 777. That's a flagship, top of the line stuff there. Why didn't it drift? And he was trying to figure out why. He couldn't figure it out. And in the process of trying to figure out what happened, he discovered that this module's made by exactly one company, and they supply every airline in the industry. And when you try to call them, they don't talk to you. And they're a subcontractor for NASA. Remember what I said about if you want to plug the holes, you want to do it very securely when it comes to hiding things, and this would be that thing. So to keep the pilots from not worrying about it, you tell them there's a guidance system inside their plane that accounts for the curvature and the spinning of the Earth, and it doesn't. And you hope to God something like this doesn't happen, to where it breaks, and the pilot goes, well, wait a minute, how am I flying normally without that thing working? Why have that thing in there at all? And when you call the company to figure out what they're actually doing, they won't talk to you. That's brilliant.
Here it is, gyroscopes. Prove unequivocally, beyond any doubt whatsoever, two things. One, that there is no curvature of the Earth, and two, that there is no motion to the Earth. Now, I'm all ready for all of the backlash and all the stuff like that. And in fact, one of the first people I'm going to go on is there is this wonderful video done in total ignorance by Lord Stephen Christ, who comes on and he says, got news for you guys. Gyroscopes have this thing called Schuler Tuning on them. And it is because of this Schuler Tuning that it proves beyond any doubt whatsoever that the Earth is, of course, concave. That would be his take on it. Not only does it not prove that it's not concave, it also proves that it's not convex either, because Stephen Christ, for being the imaginative lord that he is, obviously has never bothered to read any further about what Schuler tuning actually is and how it is actually applied. I'm going to explain that and elaborate a little bit on this for you guys so that we can dispel the Schuler tuning. I had never heard of it before. Even being a pilot for 35 years, I had never heard of it before. Even working in radio shops, right along people that had airframe and power plant licenses that were working on avionics and aircraft radio, still never had come across it. Why? Because it's a fantasy. Here's the deal with Schuler tuning. Schuler tuning describes a procedure to affect an inertial navigation system to compensate for a theoretical curvature of the Earth. Of all the navigation systems I have seen or asked others about that work in the industry, this modification seems to be conspicuously not used. Let's look at what Wiki says about Schuler tuning. Schuler tuning is a modification to the electronic control system used in inertial navigation systems. Now, this is important right here, that accounts for the curvature of the Earth. An inertial navigation system used in submarines, ships, aircraft, and other vehicles to keep track of position determines directions with respect to three axes pointing northeast and down. To detect a vehicle's orientation, the system contains an inertial platform mounted on gimbals with gyroscopes to keep it pointing in a fixed orientation in space. However, the directions northeast and down change as the vehicle moves on the curved surface of the Earth. Schuler tuning describes the modifications necessary to an inertial navigation system to keep the inertial platform always pointing northeast, south, down, yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, first of all, we have to look and say, okay, well, what's the inertial navigation system? So we look at that. An INS is a navigation aid that uses a computer, first and foremost, and that is also huge. motion sensors, accelerometers, and rotation sensors, gyroscopes, to continuously calculate via dead reckoning the position, orientation, and velocity of a moving object without the need for external references. Okay, so let me break this down and tell you what this is actually saying. Let's jump over here to the other thing that it talked about, inertial platform, which is a gyroscopic platform or a stabilized platform using gyroscopes to maintain a platform in a fixed orientation in space, blah, 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 blah. What they're talking about here is Schuler tuning is a system that describes modification to an inertial navigation system, which, first of all, an inertial navigation system, as we have already described, requires the use of a computer. Well, that, first of all, should raise a lot of red flags to anybody that was a pilot before 25 years ago, which would be me and many, many other people on the Earth. And the reason being is because we were not using computers in our aircraft at that time or any time since the Wright brothers to compensate for the curvature of the Earth. It's utterly nonsense. So what it's doing, what they're saying is that this modification brought about by Schuler tuning, which is using a computer to affect a navigation system. Now, first of all, let me tell you what the navigation system is that they're describing. These navigation systems are not in use in most aircraft today. They are in use in a large amount of the airliners, but as far as to the total percentage of all aircraft on Earth, not even a drop in the bucket. So what this is saying is that the inertial navigation system, which would be a complete autopiloting system, which would allow you to take off, fly your route, do your landing, all that stuff, all by computer control automatically. It is the Schuler tuning that is a procedure that describes how to modify an already existing internal navigation system to compensate for the curvature of the Earth, whether it be from GPS data, which, by the way, is not existent for that particular function, or some other methodology, which there is another methodology. But the bottom line is it's talking about modifying an existing navigation system that would be of the high order of technology anyway that never even existed before 25, 30 years ago. Even if it were true, which it isn't, but even if it were true that it were modifying the orientation of the gyros to keep consistent so that the gyroscope is at a constant 90-degree angle perpendicular to the center point of the Earth, which would be directly below it, there is no way to necessarily do this. And I can tell you that all navigation equipment that most airplanes use, which is a gyroscope for your artificial horizon, for your turn and slip indicator, for your rate of climb, all of those are based on straight-up gyroscopes with absolutely no modification to them to change any orientation to the gyro itself to compensate for gravity or for the curvature of the Earth. Because the whole idea is to keep the gyroscope plane at a perfect 90-degree angle to the spot that's directly below you that goes all the way to the center of the Earth. First of all, Schuler tuning is not even used in the majority of these systems. Another thing that they will talk about is there's another type of gyro that is fairly new, not hugely new, but that uses, instead of electric motors to power up the flywheel on the gyroscope, it uses vanes and air pressure. Another model that came up, and I was discussing this with Curious Life of a Flat Earther, that he caught a lot of rebuttal on, was these vanes that are in the bottom of the gyroscopic structure that take the air that is blown across the vanes that spin the gyro, and according to gravity or the orientation of the plane, it will open one of 4 air gates to be able to discharge the air that is spinning up the gyro. Well, that's all great. Now, first of all, this is something that's relatively new. Before that, they simply used electric motors to spin up the gyros. However, there are magnetic fields and other things that can cause problems with that, even though they work well for the most part. This air drive is supposedly a better system, so great. But what they're saying then is that if you modify the aircraft, its trajectory or its angle, what will happen is that the gyro will stay rigid in space, because that's what gyros do. They stay rigid in space no matter what the orientation of the plane is around it. But they're saying that when you go into like a 60-degree turn, for example, the gyroscope is going to stay rigid in space, but because the air vane that is discharging the air that is spinning up the gyro is at the sump of the gyroscopic mechanism, that it will open one of 4 corresponding gates, one for each direction, northeast, southwest, and it will force the line of gravity so that the gyroscope goes back to a perfect 90-degree perpendicular line to an imaginary line that goes down to the center of the Earth. Well, first of all, that's silly, because if you could do that simply by blowing air across some sort of a gate, you've got to take into consideration a million other factors, like what is the resistance of that gate to the air? In other words, what if it's sticky? How much air is actually going across it? You have surface contacts. You have a million things that have to be taken into consideration. But as far as it making any type of precision adjustment, that's simply impossible. What it actually does, what these air gates actually do, is they act as a dampening system. There are 2 mechanisms in a gyro that prevents it from spinning around in circles, and that is if you're in an aerobatics plane and you do a roll or a loop or something like that, obviously the cage would be rotating all the way around the gyroscope, and it would cause everything to run amok. But what they do is they put limits in on the gimbals that hold the gyroscope, so that once you go past 60 or 70 degrees, or maybe even more, there's a mechanical lock there that prevents it from going any further. What the air pressure does going through those relief gates at the bottom, those discharge gates, is it acts more of a dampening mechanism so that you don't have such a wildly gyrating artificial horizon when you've come out of some sort of a high-speed maneuver that requires a lot of banking or hard turning or something like that. The bottom line is that neither the air vanes at the bottom of the air-driven gyroscopes used to exist in the past. They were all motor-driven. And secondly, the computers to drive inertial navigation systems are only something that in the past few decades that have come about to even be able to allow an airplane to be computer-controlled. And so what happened to the 60 or 70 years before that when pilots were flying international flights? In other words, the whole idea of the Schuler Tuning navigation system that hasn't existed except for the last few decades is utter bullshit. So what gyroscopes really do is their claim to fame is they have a rigidity in space. You can buy a gyroscope. People have used gyroscopes for years. They're toys. They also make extremely high-end gyroscopes that are precision machined that will run for a long, long time, 20, 30 minutes on a spin. They also have them now where you can use little electric motors externally to spin them up to around 8,000 RPM. Well, this is something that never able to be done back in the days of antiquity when, for example, Foucault did his gyroscopic experiments. Foucault is kind of credited for all of this, by the way. Not only was his pendulum bullshit, but he also lied about his results on gyroscopes. I guess where I'm going with this is there's a Navy video, and I've got it here, and I will actually also post this. Okay, so here's the Navy aviation training film. And what they say in this makes perfect logical sense for any gyro. And they say that because gyros maintain a rigidity in space, that you can change the orientation of the gimbals all around them that are attached to it, but the gyro will stay right there. Foucault allegedly did an experiment where he and his cheesy 200-year-old gyro, supposedly, he was able to spin it up and actually see precession in the gyro, which would have indicated and proved motion, angular motion most specifically, brought about by the rotation of the Earth. That's all fine and dandy, except that everybody that has performed this experiment since he's done it, and with far better equipment, has failed to get any results that even remotely come close to what Foucault claimed that he had. A good example, Rob Durham bought an extremely high-precision gyroscope, did the precession test. Guess what? He let it run for quite a while, and he had calculated the precession based on his latitude. And, of course, the gyroscope did not move at all. There is another guy, Yeoman P., that here's his video, where he let it run for 6 hours, and it detected absolutely zero motion. Well, a lot of people came back, and their debunks was the gyroscope simply was not sensitive enough to measure this movement of the Earth, which is, of course, ludicrous, because if Foucault could do it several hundred years ago with his cheesy gyroscopes, the notion that we couldn't replicate it today with high-end 21st century engineered gyroscopes, and also we have the advantage of motors, which will keep that gyro spinning continuously, and we still cannot duplicate it. That tells me that Foucault lied. It also tells me that if in our airplane, going back to my Cessna that I rented years ago when I was first getting my private pilot's license, that had a gyroscope in it that had to be calibrated on the ground. In other words, you cage the instrument while you are on the ground, and caging is simply nothing more than setting the azimuth into the gyroscope while it's calibrated on a level surface on the ground. And when you cage it, that's the last place that you calibrate your gyros. Once you take off, the gyros continuously run, and the only thing that you correct is heading due to magnetic declination. And this is something that's a routine practice for pilots. But the bottom line is that if there were any curvature at all, not only would the gyroscope detect it in an airplane, it would detect that ridiculous amount of curvature that you'd have to be compensating at the rate of 2,800 foot per minute in a standard jet airliner. But guess what? The gyroscope simply does not detect that. Why doesn't it detect it? Because there's no curvature to the Earth. End of story. There's so many things that prove this, and anybody that thinks that there is any modification going on to the gyroscopic mechanism itself that is modifying for the curvature of the Earth is deluded, and they simply have not done their homework and looked into these strange phenomena that everybody's touting called Schuler tuning, or the air discharge vanes at the bottom of the gyroscopic gimbal structure. Doesn't exist. Didn't exist 30 years ago when I got my pilot's license. You are never, ever trained to compensate for Coriolis, curvature of the Earth. You are never trained on the instruments. In fact, it is the very nature of the instruments to fight any sort of curvature or turning away from anything that is perfectly flat level. There are a million people that are going to come back with a million rebuttals to this, and I say bring them on. Because whatever you bring back, I would suggest you really research it deeply. And then fine, if you find something that's great, present it to me. I will be happy to personally debate this with you, because for the last 3 weeks, I've done nothing but research this. And I'm telling you that gyroscopes, contrary to the people in the chat that are claiming that they prove the ball Earth, do anything but that. They prove the flat Earth. Not only do they prove the flat Earth, but they prove the motionless flat Earth. So any comments, guys?